One of them said, "Wow, on Sunday, and they dropped you off the volleyball and you flying that Thursday."
All right.
That place is super high guarded. You would be supportive of it.
All right. Neat. All right, y'all start tinkering with learning that osteo, because this becomes the points of attachments for things. It becomes the language of origin insertion. It becomes the background behind how we talk about all of this. Now, when we start working with joints, when we start working through the body, for any given joint, we are going to approach it with osteo first. So what bones make up that joint's basic structure? From that, we can understand kind of how it works in terms of what type of synovial joint this is. Then we look at what stabilizes that joint, what holds it together, what restricts its motion. From that, we know exactly what movements are capable. And then we look at what muscles are used to create those movements. So there's some other supporting pieces that we can get into, like bursa or plica or whatever else that we need to kind of tinker with. And then there's always some kind of slid in little funky biomechanics in some places that we need to kind of understand how it moves in other ways. And then these are a prime example for all of this. So that process is really what I'm trying to get at from the ground up for every joint we go through. So what is that structure? What is its stability? What is its movement capacity? What's creating that movement? Awesome. And then what helps all of it, and we can move on. Fair enough? So if you're missing any of those pieces in a lecture, then just chime in and say, hey, I'm not quite sure where this piece was. Where do we get the stability out of this? All right, so knee. Knee is very much a hinge joint. It is nice rounded condyles on that femur that sit on top of that tibial plateau. It bears our weight. Nice. We lock those legs out, and that weight transfers straight through the femur into the tibia. Both of them very stout, strong bones. For most individuals, we take this leg and we pull it into full extension, and we go to 0 degrees. So straight line, 0 degrees. Some folks have a little bit of hypermobility. You can get to -5, -10. They get it bends down a little bit. So we're going to identify that in that individual if we look bilateral for that comparison. If I go and I take this and I flex that leg and bend it, it's going to go to about 140. So in this, we then get to have a conversation about limiting factors. What is stopping this? We have this nice rounded, curved end. There isn't any kind of significant bony block. So what is stopping me from continuing to flex more than just 140? What is stopping flexion on any given individual? Muscle. So you go and flex up, and I've got a lot of hamstring muscle in the back, and I've got a lot of calf muscle behind my tibia. And so the big, fat, bulky muscles are squished against each other. Why does that matter? That matters because it gives us an expected, anticipated end feel. So each joint will have, in each direction, will have a unique end feel. So this is called a soft end feel. And it's soft because I'm squishing things together that are stopping its progression. The more muscle mass or the less muscle mass is going to kind of change that somewhat, but regardless, the feel will be largely the same. Now, what stops the knee when I go to full extension? Then do I have bones bumping into each other at full extension? I mean, I have a rounded curve and a flat plateau, and I can just slide this thing all the way around it. So what is it that when I take this and slide it up, why does it not keep going? And that's where our ligaments come into play. So we have a series of 5 ligaments of principal concern that stabilize this joint. And it's the tension created in those ligaments that give us an end point. So when ligaments create that end feel, that end position, that is a firm end point. So the third option will be if you take your own elbow and go into full extension here, that's different because I now have bone locking into bone, whereas my olecranon on your ulna locks into the back of the humerus. So that is a hard end feel where I have a bone hitting a bone. So my 3 options, I have soft, which is typically muscle. I have firm, which is restriction by ligaments. And I have hard, which is bone hitting bone. So understanding that anticipated end feel is as important as understanding the anticipated range of motion. So 0 on full extension. We go to about 140 on flexion. That flexion will be partly determined based upon the amount of muscle mass that we have within that area. So when we say that we go to 0 on full extension, how is it then that some people go to -5, -10? There are people who have a little bit more laxity within their ligament structure. Okay? So everybody's a little bit different. When you get into your eval class, we have special tests that put stress on these ligaments. Perfectly tight ones. We put a valgus stress in which we stress it into that medial aspect. We bend that knee medially. If it's perfectly taut, if it's firm, if it's not giving any, then we're not going to feel any motion. But there are some individuals who have more lax ligaments in general. And so you'll feel a little bit of joint play. You'll feel a little bit of motion. So grade 1 sprain is we partially damage it. Grade 2 sprain is we've damaged it more and have partially torn it and have gotten a little bit of joint play. Grade 3 sprain is where we have a full rupture and that thing opens wide up. There's no more restriction. So you have to discern if this person who has then hurt their knee, is it a little bit of joint play because they've partially torn it, or is it a little bit of joint play because they have lax ligaments? Monthly hormonal changes within women increase ligament laxity. So again, it's a feel where it's a bilateral comparison rather than a rigid finality that I can tell you for everybody every time. So make comparisons always to opposite knees, opposite sides, bilateral comparisons. All right. Hinge joint typically would have a 1 degree of freedom. What plane of motion do we expect to have the knee moving in? stare at you long enough to second guess yourself.
Yeah, don't do that.
So what plane is it moving? What are our options? We have frontal, we have sagittal, or transverse. And so move within a plane is to stay in contact with that plane. If we have this big chunk of glass extending from us, to stay in contact with that plane is to move within it. So flexion extension of the knee stays in contact with sagittal plane. Good? Now we have this other little hiccup with the knee in a movement called the screw hub mechanism. There's a little bit of rotation that happens from the tibia underneath the femur. We'll come back to it. But that little bit of rotation creates a second degree of freedom, so we have some within the transverse plane. All right, so ligaments that stabilize this thing. The first two, the easiest two that we have, medial collateral and lateral collateral. MCL, LCL. MCL, on the medial aspect, resists a valgus force, a valgus stress, and a force coming from the lateral towards the medial. From bowing our knee inwards. We damage this far more often than we damage the LCL. But on yourself, let's reinforce where that thing is. So reach down, relax your quad. Put your foot up on the footrest on the bar. I want you to grab the shaft of the femur before you get, so grab the diaphysis right up in here. Then I want you to palpate down to where you feel that epicondyle swelling out to get around to the condyles. Lateral side is far easier to identify that it's a much more pronounced ligament out here because you can see how it's separated by quite a bit of space as well. So as you come down, you will find that joint space as you're seated here to where the tibia comes down. So you're going to find that joint space. Once you find that joint space, find that tibial plateau just below, go back to the joint space, and then go anterior, posterior. And underneath your finger, you should feel something about half the width of a pencil, half the diameter of a pencil. And if you don't feel this on the lateral side, right? If you don't find it, then we need to fix that. Again, teach yourself by palpation. Find these things so you're confident with where they are. This is going from the lateral condyle, lateral epicondyle, down to the fibular head. So it's dropping right down into here, into that fibular head. Good? Got it? Find it on the person sitting next to you.
Yeah, you find.
Lateral collateral. Yeah.
Great. Actually, go ahead and like take your thumb and start to attach it.
Like man.
I'm fine with that.
Cool. Now, lateral side is quite pronounced. It's a separate from that joint capsule. It goes out and around. Medial side is a little bit different, more difficult to find. It is a flatter band. It's still quite palpable though. It's unique though in how. So where lateral is kind of definitive within that start, and it's very pronounced over that joint line, and then it goes down that fibular head. All pretty easy structures to find. If we zoom in comparison on medial lateral ligament, the MCL, you'll find that it's more of a fat, broader band. This is more of a thickening of that joint capsule rather than its own completely identifiable structure. On dissection, it's pretty cool to find. It runs pretty far down. So we actually have a muscle inserting in here, which is semimembranosus, and semitendinosus drops down into here. So it's connected to the hamstring muscles by some of that tissue overlap. So same idea. Find that medial condyle. It swells in, and you'll feel the difference on that swelling. Notice how much more swelling outward, inward, I guess, towards that medial aspect you get on that medial condyle. The medial condyle is significantly larger than bilateral in general. The piece we need to hold on to as we get to talking about screw heel mechanism. So you feel that flare quite a bit more, and then just over that aspect is where that originates. Find that joint line and go anterior posterior, and you'll be able to feel that band, that thickening over that joint space. It's not quite as tightly wound as you would expect with the LCL. It's less pencil-like. It's more of a broad band shape. Find it on you. Find it on somebody else. Now, I will say, as you begin that palpation, if you're starting on femoral shaft and working your way down, there's a tickle spot right on VMO that
No,
makes people
not
jump.
tickle, it's hurt.
Just hurt. Just a hurt spot.
I hope it. I was
I have a question. What if I'm like one, like, you know how like you put like one bony part? Okay.
That?
Yeah.
It's tendon. Hamstrings. Semimembranosus, semitendinosus. Good? Is that?
Yeah. Oh no, that's a reflex.
Okay, that's what happened.
You there, Dave.
It's bad, man. For real.
You like each other. Good?
Might as well show it.
He's telling me that he feels it. It's easier on an 8-year-old. That's
All right. Now, shifting gears just a touch. If you look at the top of the tibia, you get these little bumps in the middle called the intercondylar eminence, your highness, right? So these create a couple different points. They function in multiple ways. One is that they're a track. They're a track from which the femoral condyles get to ride on. So it can kind of help lateral shifting so that the femur doesn't jump track, doesn't come off. So it creates a ridge that, much like a train track, fits up inside and kind of guides over the top.
So the femoral condyles can't jump off of.
So the femoral condyles hopefully stay in place and roll smoothly. All right, now, they also create attachment points. So we have ACL and MCL, the next two ligaments that we have. So anterior cruciate means crosses through, and posterior cruciate. So it's ACL and PCL. These four ligaments, we will see injuries to a lot within your career. There's special tests for valgus stress. Go back on LCL. It resists to varus stress. I don't believe I said that. So it resists a force coming from the inside of the knee, pushing it outward. ACL goes from posterior femur, so it's going in the back of the femur and attaching more of the anterior aspect of the tibial plateau. The anterior cruciate ligament prevents or restricts anterior translation of the femur. It prevents the tibia from sliding out to the front. Conversely, the posterior cruciate goes from the front of the femur more towards the back of the tibia. It prevents the tibia from going posteriorly. What?
That one
We're having
always,
a discussion.
I always
the
got
other
that one
day.
wrong in all your exams,
Yep.
so I was like, finally.
Anterior prevents anterior, posterior prevents posterior. Now, there's some unique aspects within this. The posterior, again, is a definable ligament, but it's also connected to the outside world. It is some partially thickening of that joint capsule as it crosses in, but it has an interplay with the fluid out and around the knee in the exterior world. As such, the MCL, the LCL, MCL is definitely a thickening of that joint capsule. LCL is it's a unique extracapsular, and then PCL, which is part of that joint capsule in part. They all have adequate supply to resources, to nutrients, to blood, to the external environment. The ACL is unique though because it's predominantly or solely inside that joint space. So it doesn't connect with the outside world. So it actually has its own artery that runs with it inside the joint. The ACL, the anterior cruciate ACL, has its own artery. So one mechanism we have to identify if the ACL is torn is that if you've torn the ligament, you've torn that artery. And so within hours, your knee is a balloon, in part because the joint itself is now filled in with blood. And so a mechanism we have used for a long time to identify a strong implication that you've torn your ACL is to drop a needle into your knee and aspirate it and pull out fluid. And if it's a bloody fluid, then it's synovial fluid mixed with a lot of blood. And the only way to really get that much blood inside is either to crack the heck out of the bone or to tear your ACL. If you want the name of the artery, it's the middle genicular artery. Don't think I'm going to ask that anytime soon. So, MCL, LCL, PCL, they will heal themselves. They will largely, given enough protection, resolve their own issues. Even on a third degree, even on a complete tear, we leave it, we splint it, it will heal, and then we need to work through that process. Work through the process of getting our full range of motion. All right, range of motion. MCL bands. MCL is, there's a deep section and a more superficial section. The deep fibers actually come in and interconnect with the meniscus, with the cartilage that sits on the end of the bone. The superficial, as it comes down and around, again intertwined with tendons, the semimembranosus and tendinosus. That interconnection, that component where it touches in, if you get a blow that stresses that ligament, and this is a common theme that we'll see a couple different places, but if you get a blow that damages that ligament, it's pulling on another soft tissue structure. So those deep fibers that are attaching to the meniscus, it is quite possible in the process of damaging the MCL, it rips up the meniscus as well. Which becomes important to understand because we may very well, you need to consider that a deep MCL disruption gives us the capacity that we have to get that meniscus figured out as well. Because that's going to destabilize that system. Those superficial bands that come on the outside, inserting in with having connections with semitendinosus, semimembranosus, can have implications on a couple other chronic irritations that come in with those tendons in conjunction with the MCL. There are some who present with non-traumatic, like slow onset kind of MCL injuries that are actually stemming from biomechanics and irritation to the semimembranosus and tendinosus. Which is kind of crazy. More often than not, if we have a ligament injury, it is a a sudden acute kind of injury. The MCL, with some of its biomechanics, tends to, there's times at which we can get irritations and pain with it that are coming from more chronic onset. All right, MCL. So with its range of motion, it is taut, it is tight at both flexion and extension. So if you've got somebody who has an MCL injury, first degree, second degree sprain, clearly a third degree is fully ruptured, we have problems. But first degree, second degree, that individual is going to want to keep it somewhere in the middle. If they go full extension, that puts some of those fibers on stretch. If they go full flexion, that puts some of the fibers on stretch. So your MCL injury folks are going to want to be in this happy middle world where it's slightly flexed to keep it away from tension spots.
So it's tight in both directions.
So it will be taut, yeah, tight, both at full extension and full flexion. So when we work that range of motion to try to get them to have that full range back, we need to gently kind of coax and desensitize to get back to full extension, back to full flexion. LCL tends to not quite be so twitchy. Not quite as much. ACL is somewhat the same way. The fibers are actually rotated. It's spun around so that you put your fingers here, one over the other. The twist allows for some fibers to create tension while you go into full extension, and when you go into full flexion, then it will put tension into the others. So it is able to provide restriction throughout the range of motion, but with that twisting kind of tensioning in it. That's the ACL. So those two are unique in the sense that they're kind of assisting and maintaining that joint stability throughout that range of motion, coming from different fibers being taut at different body positions. All right. So we're going to kick off my patella and the patella tendon. We're going to peer inside a little bit. So there's your ACL as it comes forward towards the anterior, which is glancing through the joint. Scroll the dude around, and there's my PCL sitting in the back. Very much a thickening within that posterior joint capsule. Whereas ACL runs completely through the middle. Now the ACL is further unique because if it ruptures, it doesn't heal itself. MCL, LCL, PCL, they will. They can. ACL does not. What's the problem?
It's of the artery.
Well, we have that artery, but it's actively bleeding, which is what a torn tissue is going to do, right?
Capsule is in the capsule.
So if it's in the capsule, what problem does that create? Why? Why can't it clot? Why can't we rebuild the ligament? You fully tear the MCL, the LCL, it's going to hurt, it's going to bleed, it's going to have problems, it's going to get bruising, you're going to have all kinds of unhappiness. But it will recreate that bridge through that bleeding process, through that clotting process, and from that bridge, it will then rebuild itself over time. Why can the ACL not do that? It has its own blood supply, it has its own artery. Yes, we've ruptured it, but that just means it's profusely pumping blood everywhere. So why is it not able to bridge itself? The synovial fluid is bathed in another fluid. So that constantly keeps washing it away, moving it around. It constantly keeps preventing us from creating that framework structure from which we can work. So to fix it, we go in, or a carpenter goes in, calls himself a doctor, and he drills some holes and he aligns it, and then he goes and takes the semitendinosus or the patellar tendon or a piece of a cadaver, and he screws in a new ligament. And then that ligament becomes our structure. And then because it's separated from its original point, it dies. but the body uses that scaffolding to then rebuild itself. So over the course of 6 to 8 to 12 months, it goes from a foreign tissue to dead to rebuilt and replaced with our own tissue. They've come out with new procedures that may change what life looks like for how you guys see ACL reconstructions in the future. They've come out with a technique, and I think Boston College is the place that they've identified this, but they are able to inject and create a foam bridge that creates the structure from which your body can directly rebuild along the lines of what was there. So depending upon how exploded that ligament is, you can kind of grab the ends and then create a little bit of a bridge structure. And then we have the original origin and the original insertion of that, the attachment points. So we don't change the biomechanics because we're able to reconnect those pieces.
It was essentially encapsulated in itself.
Kind of, yeah, just tether the two ends with a functioning bridge of some sort, and then the body rebuilds along those lines and restructures.
Kind of neat.
It's very neat. So there's some unique pieces though. If I go and I take your semitendinosus and I create a new ligament for you, you are the strongest immediately post-surgery in terms of that being there and stable and anchored. And then it dies and it gets weaker until it starts rebuilding and it gets stronger. So let's say 5-month time period. The first month and a half, for the first probably 2 to 4 weeks, it's pretty strong, and then it's dying. And then by the time you're hitting that 2-month time period, it's at its weakest. And it's pretty volatile until you get in and beyond 4 to 6 months as it's trying to rebuild and recreate. Now overlay that with the progression of strength and stability that we are actively trying to get this person back with. Post-surgery, they don't want to move much, so it's strongest when they can't use it. We get them walking again, we get them moving again, we get that thing strengthening itself, and their body strengthening, more reliable, more stable, more muscle activation. And when we hit 2 months, that person should be walking without the use of any kind of assistance. In that 3rd month, we're working on strength. So we've got somebody who's finally able to be mobile and active again. And that's when that ligament is the weakest, when that repair is the weakest. And we have to get them to where that strength progresses into coordination and agility and power production, all while we're getting that very early peak of, or getting out of that trough of weakness to where it's strengthening again. So rehabilitation becomes a very delicate balance of how can I push you carefully to protect the tissue while fixing everything else, so when the tissue is fully recovered, you are ready to go. And so you can see how that takes a specialized kind of care. The fastest I've seen somebody release is about 4.5 months off an ACL. And that's, when you look at that strength curve of that ACL, you better have a lot of faith in the strength and agility dynamically that you put in that person, because it's not fully healed yet. So change that conversation then though. Put a foam bridge in initially. It is weak. It is a foam bridge. It is a tethering of those two endpoints. You don't have that initial strength. And then the body rebuilds and goes. And how long does that take? And what does that do to our known progression of rehabilitation?
Wouldn't healing time and rehab time be about the same, but the progression, instead of kind of doing this and then plateau, essentially plummet and then come up and plateau, wouldn't it?
I think my concern is in that initial phase, I can be pretty confident that I can get you weight bearing and walking on the current system. I think if I'm that much more concerned about the repair itself because it's so weak with a foam bridge, then I'm probably going to be more hesitant to get you up and moving as fast. So hit that 2-month mark, and I don't know that you're going to have as much control.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It would plummet first instead of doing the kind of dip that it does when you're like strong first, then weak, then strong again.
Yeah.
So it would just go straight weak and then come up.
And I think it's going to take longer to if it takes me longer to get you full weight bearing and longer to get some of your base strength in, then I'm not going to be able to get into the agility and the coordination and the power production as quickly.
But wouldn't you also then have been like 13, right? Yeah.
So I think that we probably have a reduced risk of osteoarthritis. I think we have a reduced, because we have improved biomechanics for reattaching its original points. But I have a feeling that we won't see 4.5-month returns. We'll see 6 to 9. So I think it's like a better long-term outcome.
I was going to say, but and you're also not removing a piece of the.
They're not impacting other tissues, which there is some research that says if I pull a semitendinosus tendon, if I pull, that changes the biomechanics of the knee some.
And wouldn't it also be like closer to like arthroscopic because you wouldn't need to?
It wouldn't be open surgeries. You wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
So as you progress, you have to acknowledge that staying on top of surgical procedures is going to have an influence on your approach to care. So being a lifelong learner is absolutely what you are indebting yourself to in the process of getting into this field.
Okay, I have a question. So if you get the bridging compared to the normal standard review now, it wouldn't, based on what you do, like if you're an athlete, you'll probably go with surgical where they're going in and doing it because you got to get back to
faster. So I think that may be one of the considerations is that time to return to play. Am I willing to risk long-term osteoarthritis as a 50, 60, 70-year-old to get back 2 months early for this one season? I have every belief that this isn't going to be an easy conversation. And it's worthwhile to see how it plays out over time. All right. Next little piece. You'll notice that we have these raised, elevated ridges. Raised, elevated ridges. So this is a thickening, a meniscus. So on top of that hyaline cartilage, that is the articular surface of the bones that kind of helps prevent them from grinding, we also have this padded meniscus that runs around, this cartilage that adds a few layers of fun to the knee. Like kick off. Oh, that's not a good idea. Now we're going to keep it off. There we go. So look at it from above, and you'll see that the medial side, which is a larger condyle, is a bit more open. It's kind of C-shaped. The lateral side, where it's a smaller condyle, almost goes in more of an O shape. The outside edges, like a triangle, kind of flare outward. So it's creating, as much as we have the intercondylar eminence to function as a track, it's creating almost like a partial socket to help hold and cradle that condyle so it doesn't slip around. So as those condyles roll through, that meniscus is there to kind of cradle to make sure it's staying in line and center with that tibia. Because it's flaring up and it has an elevation to it, it's also a shock absorber. So it's cushioning some of that impact as well, so we can land a little bit harder. Now this tissue is unique because it is connected directly to the bone. Parts of it have blood supply, but parts of it do not. So it is the process of walking, of weight bearing, of loading it, that helps get the nutrients into it. So that synovial fluid that's inside, that is the nutrition source for anything intracapsular. So if I don't have a direct blood supply, then to get that nutrient, that synovial fluid in there, think of it like this is SpongeBob. You take SpongeBob and you squish him, you push out all that fluid and you let it go and he absorbs everything back in. It's a sponge. So if I don't have that weight bearing, then I'll lose some of that aspect of helping it get the nutrients it needs. Which becomes another interesting dynamic with the rehabilitation, because if I have a tear in here and I need it to heal, my surgeon tends to don't mess with my surgery site. Unload it, don't stress it, don't put shear force on it, don't tear the repair. But on some level, we also want to have a little bit of load because we want to get new nutrients in there. So there's this fun level of balance between the therapist who is trying to very carefully heal some tissue that is very sensitive to forces they get put on. To promote that healing, that we can get them back as quickly as possible in the best way possible while still protecting that tissue. Good? Awesome. So there's one more ligament that I skipped. ALL. So anterolateral ligament. ALL. So we come back up here and we see there's my LCL. There's my MCL. There's ACL. There's PCL. And we have this guy sitting right in here. So he's originating on the lateral condyle with the LCL, but it dives diagonally forward in towards Gerdy's tubercle. So orient yourself. We have tibial tuberosity in the front of the knee. We go medially, so go ahead and palpate that on yourself just to kind of reinforce. You go directly into your shin, just below that joint line, and you got that big pronounced bump in front, tibial tuberosity. If you go medially, you get this very nice, smooth area, this landmass on the medial shaft of the tibia, which is pes anterior, which is the insertion point for 3 different muscles. You go lateral, and you get kind of more of a bumpy anchor point. We reference Gerdy's tubercle, G-E-R-D-Y, Gerdy's tubercle. So Gerdy's tubercle, you've got anterolateral ligament coming into the top part. Your IT band will drop in and hit below that. So good landmarks in that as well. But running diagonal, this is a rotation-based restriction. So it's going to prevent that tibia from rotating too far. All right. 0 degrees extension, 140 degrees flexion. Let's chat about the muscles that create those motions. So sitting on the anterior thigh, get stuff back. To create extension, give me some muscles. And I have the quadriceps as a muscle group. For the best of my ability, I try to group things to help create structure of things to learn and focus on. Quadriceps, there are 4 muscles. 3 of them are very similar in nature. 1 of them is a little bit unique, both in name as well as origin. So muscles we have vastus, medialis. You'll frequently hear references vastus, medialis, oblique. What does oblique mean in general?
the direction of the fibers.
So oblique means like diagonal or offset, like, right? Off angle. So it is referencing, that oblique is referencing the fiber direction. So if you look at this picture, even though it's just a drawing, you'll see that these fibers are running diagonally rather than longitudinally. So that gets into muscle fiber typing, muscle descriptions. We have pennate versus fusiform. Pennate is like a diagonal parking lot. Fusiform, longitude, long fibers that run from origin to insertion. When they contract, the sarcomeres, there's more of them contracting, they can move more distance. Pennate, I can put more fibers in per square inch. They're not going to contract as far, but I can get more fibers in there, which means I can produce more force. So VMO is a very powerful muscle. Vastus lateralis on the lateral aspect. I'm going to resect this guy here for a second. Sitting underneath, I have vastus intermedius. So 3 muscles within vastus. VMO, vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius. They all originate proximal femur. Trochanteric line, medial lip of linea aspera. Greater trochanter and upper lateral surface of linea aspera. All this happy stuff, proximal femur. Dropping down into the patella itself, to the quadriceps tendon, and then we get to the patellar tendon where the final insertion point is tibial tuberosum. So the fourth one that we have is rectus femoris. And rectus femoris has a different name. It has a different origin. It has a different function. So it originates on the pelvis. So that changes things. That means that it's a hip flexor as much as it is a knee extensor. Whereas the others originate on the femur and cross down, they have one goal. Their one goal is to extend that knee. Rectus femoris, because it crosses 2 joints, has to act actively on both joints. 2 joint muscles tend to fatigue sooner. 2 joint muscles tend to cramp sooner. It's good to know which ones do those kinds of things. It also means we have to be able to change body positions to assess them. If I want to try to isolate rectus femoris from the other quadriceps or rectus femoris from the other hip flexors, to know which ones are doing what changes what body position you need to put somebody into. So the origin here is a landmark called anterior inferior iliac spine. So what I need is find the point of your hip. Right here, and that's pronounced. So this nice big bony prominence, anterior superior iliac spine, ASI. So if you take about a thumb width below that, and a thumb width in, so there's a landmark because its pelvis curves in towards, again, here's your pubic symphysis, so your pelvis is curving in towards that spot. So you go down a thumb and in a thumb, and that's AIIS. Now to reinforce that, have your finger right about there, and then raise your hip. And you should be able to all of a sudden feel the tendon and the tautness pop up of rectus femoris. So all of a sudden you've created tension on that tendon in that spot. You poke somebody else here, and they're going to knee jerk because it's a little ticklish right there. Okay? So reinforce the origins, reinforce that feel, reinforce a tightening muscle so that you know what to expect when it moves. Quadriceps, 4 muscles, vastus, 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 medialis oblique, lateralis, intermedius. Rectus femoris runs over the top. Those create knee extensions. Side note. You tear an ACL. There is a sensor in your ACL. There is a very specialized mechanoreceptor on the Golgi ligament organ. That if that ligament gets stretched, it says you need to stop doing that. That mean? Yes, it is. All right. Insertion point of quadriceps tendon, patellar tendon over quads, tibial tuberosity. It reaches over and kind of drops back in to grab that tibial tuberosity. In this position, slightly flexed, it has an anterior pull on your tibia. What does the ACL do? Prevents anterior translation. So if I go and have too much tension on my ACL, then that little Golgi ligament organ goes, you need to stop. And if I tear that ligament, then that little Golgi ligament organ is like, you really need to stop because something's not right. I'm freaking out. And so it actually sends a signal to the VMO to say stop firing, because the VMO, again, with it being a penne, being diagonal, is the most force producing. It is creating an anterior translation. So your body shuts it off. So it stops harming your ACL, except we've already torn it. So one of the first indications that we've torn an ACL is that within a few hours, you have almost complete atrophy of your VMO. You cannot contract it because there's a signal coming from your knee through your spine and back down to that muscle that's telling it not to fire. So part of our recovery is to get your brain to override that signal to create that contraction back. So before we even put you in for surgery, it's beneficial for us to work with an individual to overcome that neurological signal to get a solid contraction back in that VMO. Cool? So we'll find this in a couple different places. In the ankle, your posterior tibialis. If you damage your ATF, if you have a significant ankle sprain, frequently your body is shutting off the posterior tib. In the shoulder, if you damage, dislocate, slap lesion, whatever, significant damage in the shoulder, your body shuts off serratus anterior. I can't explain all of them as simply as I think I can with the VMO, but that happens. That inhibition, that shutting off of a muscle, which distinctly creates problems with control. It offsets that balance, things again that we need to intervene with. So recognizing those pieces becomes important. Okay? All right. Backside. Hamstrings. There are 4 of them. Ish. So immediately, we have this big, broad, fat guy right here. And then we have this more wiry guy coming down through there. So the deep one, semimembranosus. It is named membranosus. If you dissect it out, it has a lot of fascia interwoven with it. It looks like a membrane. It looks a little different. Semitendinosus is a longer definable tendon that kind of snakes its way down. Both of those, you would ask. So innervation for the quadriceps is femoral nerve. And for the quads. Innervation for semimembranosus, semitendinosus is tibial nerve. So Semimembranosus medial side, semitendinosus medial side, both of them originating on the ischial tuberosity, ISCHIAL, ischial tuberosity. This is your sit bone, your butt bone. So, discreetly, slide your hands under your cheeks. And right where that cleft is, right where your butt cheek kind of meets in with your thigh itself, if there is a rigid, hard bone right in that space, middle of your leg, middle of your butt cheek, right where that fold is. Too much blood. So that ischial tuberosity is the origination point for 3 of those muscles. Semimembranosus and tendinosus both come off of there. It is quite possible to have an avulsion to where you rip that off. Make sure about that. So the other muscle is, well, so the other side, so semimembranosus, tendinosus, both medial. And then on the lateral side, we have biceps femoris. Now, biceps femoris is unique. So the long head, biceps means it's 2, right? So bi. The long head originates ischial tuberosity. The short head originates about mid-shaft of femur and drops down. They come in together into the fibular head. You could argue with me all day long about it being 1 versus 2 muscles. That's my ish. They have different innervations. So membranosus, tendinosus, biceps, long head are all tibial nerve. Short head is different in that it has common fibula, which is the point at which the sciatic nerve splits tibial versus common fibula.
So it's just the short head or both short head and long head?
At what? Innervation? Tibial nerve for long, short head is common fibula. So it has different origins, it has different innervation, but the origins are pretty significant because ischial tuberosity is on what bone? It's on the ischium, which is one of the pelvis bones, one of the 3 that make the pelvis. So if it's if they originate on the pelvis, that means it is above the hip, which means it's acting on the hip. So 3 of your 4 hamstring muscles are hip extensors, as well as knee flexors. We got into this conversation looking at what these muscles do on the knee. So knee extension versus hip flexion. Knee extension versus knee flexion is the quads versus the hamstrings. But those muscles that originate on ischial tuberosity, the 3 of the 4, come down and act both hip extension as well as hip flexion. Biceps femoris short head then, because it comes off the femur below the hip, it is acting only to assist with knee flexion. Which means that if we're going to assess it, again, we have to change body positions to be able to go through that piece. To be able to perform that
So
movement.
agree with that, you said besides flexion for those first 3, they do extension as well.
For the hip.
They do hip extension as well as knee flexion. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So if it's crossing 2 joints, it's going to act on 2 joints. If it's acting on 2 joints, it has more work to do. They tend to fatigue sooner, they tend to cramp sooner. Give me a runner who is hamstring dominant in their run. They overstride, they reach out in front. Go put them into a marathon, and by mile 20, it is their hamstring and their calves that are going to be cramping. 2 joint muscles. What's that? Yeah, well.
Because I run like 8 games in a day.
So we changed you to being more glute dominant. Glutes just work hip extension. Hamstrings are much happier. They don't work so much. Glutes are more powerful muscle. Only works on 1 joint ish. There's a lot. There's a whole book called Ish. It's one of my favorite books. It's a kid's story called Ish. Love it. Love it. If you have kids, go get Ish. If you haven't seen it, go get Ish.
I have it. Ish.
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 ISH. Love Ish.
I have to go the beat to sleep.
That's my favorite.
What age?
Ish is for kids. It's a children's thing. But it's relevant. All right. So feel these though, because you can. Hey, you get ischial tuberosity, you get all day long. Put your finger on ischial tuberosity and then heel hook into your chair, and you again can feel the tension that's coming into those hamstrings as you fire them. So you can find them and get to them. Heel hook in, I want you to palpate distally. Your hamstrings are very pronounced. Create a leg curl back in. You go medial side. If you relax, find that shaft, start working your fingers posterior, and then heel hook, you can find that all of a sudden there's these cables that pop out. Now with your knee flexed to about 90 degrees, those hamstrings are pulling that tibia posteriorly. What do you know? You tear your ACL and your body actively tells your hamstrings to fire like mad to prevent anterior translation of the tibia. Another sign of having an ACL tear is that your hamstrings are locked tight. And that happens within about 10 minutes post-injury. So if you're getting to somebody beyond 5 minutes or so on that ACL assessment, those hamstrings tend to be so locked in, it's hard to get certain tests to work because the hamstrings are doing the job the ACL used to do. So medially, if you go distal, you should be able to find both tendons. You should feel membranosus and tendinosus. Membranosus, well, let's do tendinosus first. Tendinosus is dropping into what we call pes anserine. So you remember finding tibial tuberosity. You go medial side of it, and we get this nice open flat plane right in here, and you've got pes anserine. It feels, I mean, you can feel the bone, but there's definitely another tissue in there. It's all these tendinous insertions. SGT, sartorius gracilis semitendinosus. That's your pes anserine. So tendinosus drops in. We haven't gone over the other two yet. They're more hip muscles. Membranosus is just crazy fun. So simply, I can say that, and what invisible body is showing it, you can grab membranosus. And it's inserting into a space called the groove for the semimembranosus. If you look at a tibia, find posterior tibia, find the tibial tuberosity, pes anserine, and you keep going medially, there's this little groove on that tibial plateau. Just below it, that's the groove for the semimembranosus. That's a little bit of a lie, because semimembranosus actually has 5 insertion points. Like, what are you doing? Keep it simple. It's groove for semimembranosus works. But do recognize that it isn't just a singular point. Semimembranosus is actually almost like a 5-finger glove. It's got 5 insertions that wrap around. Some of it into the joint capsule, some of it into the groove. Other pieces come up into that MCL in front. It wraps around the knee to grab it. Very, very powerful, very, very stable, very, very controlling. Laterally, then, if you go and grab biceps femoris, and that guy drops right into fibular head. So there's long head, there's short head, both of them going down into the head of the fibula. And sitting right underneath that is your LCL. Good? Okay, so we have some areas of pressure, some protection. Where we have friction, our body tries to mitigate that. Where tissue can rub over bone, where soft tissue can slide over something rough and hard, your body's like, that's probably not a good idea. So we have bursa. Bursa they create like, they release synovial fluid of sorts. They create like motor oil. It's a lubricant that helps things slide across. So anywhere you see the little purple marshmallows, there's purple blobs on here, those are bursa. So we'll come back to the posterior ones later, but there's some pretty pronounced ones in front of us here. So first and foremost, we have the superficial prepatellar bursa. So it sits on top of the kneecap. This is fun. There's one called the olecranon bursa as well. That if we go and say, I don't know, slam this into the floor playing volleyball, then we can damage it. And acutely, they will go and swell up. It looks like a softball will be sticking off the end. So with this guy, you have to discern, did they hit the ground hard enough that they cracked the kneecap? And this is just massive amounts of swelling from a broken kneecap. Grossly unfortunate. Or is this just a busted bursa, which will typically resolve itself within a day, 2 days. The swelling will go down, the body will reabsorb it. They'll be tender and sore, but life will go on.
Is the pain different
Yes.
in a bursa versus a,
Yes.
yeah, I was gonna say, more.
The intensity of a cracked patella would be typically more specific. Yeah. Go Google those images and type in like busted bursa. And you're gonna see like softballs hanging off here and sticking out on top of the knee. They look grossly deformed for the joint.
I rolled my ankle real bad about a week ago, and right after the fact, I had about a golf ball. So, 50%.
All right. Below it then, we have the suprapatellar and the superficial infrapatellar. So superficial prepatellar, superficial infrapatellar. So pre being before, infra being below. And underneath my quads, you have another little dude called the suprapatellar bursa. Superficial prepatellar on the kneecap. Superficial infrapatellar below the knee. Suprapatellar bursa, which is above the kneecap, but deep to the quads. You also notice something kind of unique in that image above. There's these cute little bands that are coming down. It looks like they're inserting into that suprapatellar bursa. So there's a muscle deep to your quads called the articularis genu. Genu is the Latin term for knee. So articularis, it assists the knee's movement. And it doesn't do it by actively grabbing onto bone to move the bone. It's actually inserting into the bursa and into the joint capsule to pull it out of the way when we go into extension. So when we contract our quads, we're contracting this little muscle at the same time to pull all the soft, squishy tissue out of the way so the joint can move the way it needs to move. I did. On occasion, conversations with them.
Yeah, I don't know what I was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I was
The only
little.
thing, I have a slide where it says, I don't have any pictures of this time, please enjoy the slide, thanks for paying attention, and that's all I got.
There you go, it's right there. It's a place marker to remind me to do these things, but then I'm so bad. I think I'm still on the 4th slide of my PowerPoint. PowerPoint's trying to nuts. Let me teach pathology where I don't remember 90% of that information, and then I'm like slide by slide clicking on stuff. Like, and this, and this. So I can look at this. All right. A couple others are hiding in here. There's a sneaky little dude laterally. Right there. Get him. Got him. Feet to the bursa. So it's helping my biceps femoris as it comes down and my LCL as it comes in. It keeps the pressure off of that fibula. And then on the medial side, hiding underneath there's sartorius, hiding underneath gracilis, and then there's semitendinosus right there. There's a sneaky little dude sitting right there called your pes anserine bursa. So again, as I have tendons wrapping around the knee, it's helping to protect those tendons from rubbing across that bone. And then from that view, then we see the last one we need to get, which is underneath that patellar tendon, which is my deep infrapatellar. So it's protecting any kind of grinding of the quad of the patellar tendon from being on top of that tibial plateau. So 4 anterior, 1 medial, 1 lateral. Remember the rest of the two. Oh, and then before that too.
So we don't need the gastro.
We'll come back to talk about gastroc when we go back in to talk about gastroc. So we'll chat about it. All right, so what type of joint is this? Hinge joint. What's its range of motion? 0 to 140. Good. What muscles create extension? Quadriceps, which is my vastus. VMO, vastus lateralis, intermedius, and rectus femoris. Rectus femoris is unique. Why is it unique? Two joint muscle. Where does it originate? What is it? AIIS, anterior inferior iliac spine. Flexes the hip, extends the knee. Acts differently than the others. Good? Extension, so flexion, posterior side. What muscles do we have that flex the knee? Hamstrings. What muscles are the hamstrings? Membranosus, tendinosus, biceps femoris. Long and short. If you go chat with Weezer, you'll get ish all over the place. All right. Your ish is not the same as my ish.
No.
Okay, so how many degrees of freedom do we have at the knee? 2. Oh my goodness, we want to chat about one second. So we got to have a conversation about the other. The other. Which condyle is larger? Medial or lateral? Medial. Larger ball, smaller ball. Medial condyle, lateral condyle. If I put a pin through them and rotate them, one of them is going to roll farther because it has a larger radius. Bigger condyle rolls farther than lateral condyle. That creates rotation. It means it's traveling farther on the tibia. So when I go into full extension, this medial side rotates farther. So that's going to create a lateral motion, a lateral rotation of the tibia as it goes into full extension. So one ball rolls farther than the other ball, and because of that, I get more rolling. Oops, hold on. Yeah, I'm going on. So medial's backwards a little bit. So I get more rolling, which is going to create more rotation. It's going to create rotation as I go in the last 10 degrees of extension. So what does this do? It dials the bones and locks them in place. So to reinforce that, it means it's taking my body weight when I'm fully extended, and it's unloading my muscles. So stand up for me. Put your hands on your quadriceps. Legs are fully extended, and jiggle. You get lots of jigglage. If you're fully relaxed, fully standing, you get plenty of jiggles. How's that? Now, partial squat. Stick your tushy out. Like you should be doing a good squat. Make sure you have a squat technique, right? You stick your butt out like you're sitting on a toilet. Good. You should be always able to look down and see your toes when you do proper squat. So get into a partial squat, hands on quads, now jiggle. We got a lot less jigglage. So if I flex my quads, that muscle's tight. If I stand up erect, that muscle's relaxed. Your quadriceps will jiggle because the load is through your bones. That is the function of the screw home mechanism. It allows us to be upright bipedal for long periods of time without fatiguing and feeling the need to sit down. Larger condyle, when we go into extension, rolls farther than lateral. Larger medial rolls farther than lateral. Creates an external rotation, a lateral rotation in the tibia. So that creates it. So clearly we have to have a way to uncreate it, to undo it. Because if it's locked out and we try to go into flexion, we need to do something else to allow it to come back in. You flip that knee around, grab that gastroc, make it go away, and we have this lovely little band of diagonal muscle sitting right in here behind the tibia. So it originates on the lateral condyle underneath the LCL. It's deep to it. And it runs diagonally to the medial side of the tibia where it pulls it medially to unlock it in that first 10 degrees of flexion, and then it's done its job and the hamstrings take over and fully flex. So that rotation component, which is called the screw home mechanism, is there so that our body weight can be transferred through our skeletal system rather than fatiguing muscles. It's created through the structure of our bones, where the medial condyle is larger than the lateral. So we have a difference in centers of rotation. Same center of rotation, we have a difference in radius, so there's a difference in arc length. So it creates a torque, a lateral external rotation of the tibia, which is then unlocked from the posterior side by the popliteus muscle. Which grabs from, this originates under the LCL, goes to the medial side of the posterior tibia to medially rotate that. So here to turn it in. Which, what do you know that ALL would be the opposite restriction, preventing it from going too far? Anterolateral ligament would be the one that runs from here to here. So if I immediately rotate, then it's getting taut and preventing it from immediately rotating too far. How convenient. So there's a couple injuries that showed up in a radiology journal back in 13, I think, in which we identify that from the structures that cross the medial side, the MCL, the three tendons that come in for the sartorius gracilis semitendinosus, that rotation can actually create rubbing and damage to either the tendons or to the bones themselves. So we're actually showing up the periostitis in these bones, both proximally and distally, from what I believe is that rotation that occurs as you go into full extension. Because that rotation would shift that position and cause rubbage. So again, insidious onset of medial knee pain that otherwise isn't currently described in any physical therapy or athletic training. Well, I mean, there's one here.
But yeah,
There's the Pezan Serene bursa.
but nothing to help prevent that.
No, there's really not. I mean, you get this guy right here, which is semimembranosus bursa, so he helps some, but the irritation we're getting.
Coming across.
So what they found is that if you look at the angle
Right.
of the tibial cleft, will come down and then come in. That angle right through there, if it's too abrupt, then that MCL can actually rub in there from that rotation. And so you're going to get periostitis in here. Or you have sartorius and gracilis coming down and rubbing over this proximal condyle. And then what we've seen as well is we actually get isolated MCL injuries from the semimembranosus getting too tight in controlling. So as you go into screw home mechanism, as you go into full extension, and that's externally rotated, the semimembranosus, as it's grabbing on here, I mean, because it's attaching further out than any other muscle, it's more geared to restrict that medial rotation. So it eccentrically both slows the leg going into extension, as well as preventing that external rotation of tibia. So semimembranosus on a heel strike, overstrike runner can get quite trigger happy and tight if people aren't stretching or releasing it. So you take a semimembranosus that's grabbing in here, and again, it inserts through this MCL, and so you'll get people presenting with an acute MCL sprain who never fell and had no trauma because the tension of membranosus. So if you assess membranosus, it's like a cable compared to the others. Release it, magically the MCL pain goes away. So yeah, so that will be a publication that's coming out in the near future because it's not in the lit yet. Presenting on that at SWATA, it's not anything you're going to be tested on. I'll let me preface that. When I jump off the deep end and go into injuries, that's not what your tests are going to be on. This class is on the anatomy, but there's so many places that it's just the connections need to be made. And I'm hoping that if I can start, and you can start seeing patterns and so forth, looking for those. But this class is about the anatomy, so feel free to be like, it's too much, man. Okay. That is one other piece. Little piece of tissue. Let me get. Right? We're gonna go. So there is a joint capsule that covers all of your knee. And just, yeah, it's very, very subtle little, it's like rolling your finger over a hair, right? So on the anterior aspect of the kneecap, on the medial side, if you go anterior to posterior over that medial border of the patella, and you can kind of capture, more so on some people because it's more pronounced on some people, this little bit of a hair, and it's a thickening within the joint capsule. It's called a plica, right? So that little piece of plica is just, it's just residual from development. It is nothing, but it can catch and get extremely irritated and feel like sharp pains in the knee. You find it? No? So some people are going to be hard to find out more so than
I
others.
found it only once in my whole life. I feel it in my toe.
Where?
Like it was like right at here.
So like
Medial
Basically
side.
catching the joint capsule.
of the patella.
Yeah.
So these are
Yeah.
So
Medial
it is
side.
that subtle to find. It's not an easy thing to catch. But if somebody's got it irritated, as soon as you hit it, like, yeah, that, you can do it on your knee. Symptoms, inflammation, NSAIDs, on getting cyclists on occasion if their seats aren't adjusted right because their knee is kind of catching it just the wrong angle. Just know it's there. I had my basketball player who came back in at 4.5 months, felt a pop in her knee after she came back and immediately went into freak out mode because she thought she retore her ACL. It turned out that she just felt that little piece catch and pop across the kneecap. So the pop she felt was just a plica grinding across the patella, which is completely benign compared to everything she's been through over 6 months of an ACL event. So, all right. Hands slapped, absolutely, for those of you that didn't bother getting through the journals. Get them done, please. Keep up with the work. Osteo. Take the time to get through your osteo lists. Figure that out through the feet. Next week, we're going to do lower leg into ankle and the foot as much as we can. Okay? So get that prepped. So this is day 2. Our test is a week from Friday, which means we have 2 more classes. So we're going to do lower leg into ankle, and then we're going to do foot, and then you've got a test on Friday. That was still last semester.
You said homework.
The homework was doing your journal.
Oh.
Yep.
This too.
You've done that before. You're good with that. I know that.
I did my journal.
So, work on this. Work on layers. Draw it. Draw the bones, label the bones, figure out where your gaps are, fix those gaps. Go back, add in with a different color the ligaments. Label them, cool. Erase them, figure out where your gaps are, do it again. Grab a new color, add in muscles. Go through it, label it, origin, insertion, action, innervation. Don't need innervation so much yet.
Well, I mean, the white, like regular
So,
size, yeah.
work with this material
Monday, Wednesdays.
piece by piece. Be active with it because it's a lot.
Yeah. So Monday, Wednesday, Wednesday,
So we
Football for me.
I saw my flashcards.
I'm trying to do something completely
I have like a
different.
stack like this.
It's only been the first test. Then I'm like,
And then you gave up on mine and you're like, nope.
First time?
How do you see your name? Dumbo?
Y'all can put bones away for me. I appreciate it.
so it did work.
So yeah, little catch up. I think you just realized that I think the journals aren't so living like the wikis are. So I'm going to swap out the journal assignment for a wiki assignment. I'll do that today, and that way you can go back and edit anything you do.
Oh,
So that way it's. So that fixes, I think, an issue. So don't stress. I'll white blackboard, clear of journal stuff, and then you can repost as a wiki as an individual. We'll have that.
Yeah, it releases when it releases when you stamp.
So that's when it comes into effect. That's a good skill mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Because I was looking at because if it's
Yeah, I
matrix,
want-
CBR rotates.
No, he was serious.